Welcome back to the National Post Politics Bureau, where Christopher Nardi, we are in the home stretch of the federal election campaign, and we have been trying to figure out if polling, betting markets, all these things, what they can tell us about who's going to win. And I think we have some information on that. But first of all, we talked to FanDuel, which is a betting site, not affiliated. We're getting no money for this. We're not betting on the election. Nope. We're just trying to use it for information. What can they tell us about what's going on here?
So, you know how we've talked about in previous videos, this just crazy evolution, right? Where the Liberals were heavily behind the Conservatives just back in December, 20-point leads, deficits to the Conservatives in the polls. And the betting markets at the time also reflected that. And so to give you an idea, for those who may not be familiar, there's a number of ways to measure odds, but one of them is the American system, which is if an odd for someone is a plus, that means they're usually the underdog. So at the time, December, the Liberals were what we call plus 1450 and up to plus 1700 to win the election. That means if you put $100 in, you would make $1,700 back. Yeah. Those are basically, they're pegging your chances of winning at extraordinarily low. Yeah. Fast forward, we had FanDuel pull out some stats. Now, FanDuel only operates here in Canada, in Ontario, but Ontario being the biggest voter pool for Canada, it gives you really interesting data. So the number that FanDuel pulled out for us was fascinating. So they said, since they've made this kind of betting line available, who will win, who will be the sworn-in government at the end of this election, 70% of the bets have actually been made on the Conservative Party of Canada.
And they're now underdogs, right?
They are very much, no, it's not steep underdogs, so they've increasingly become underdogs as the election has advanced. Yeah. They were more or less at par, actually, with the Liberals when the election started on March 23rd. Now, the latest numbers that I saw was that the Conservatives at winning are plus 270. So again, I mentioned plus means that you're an underdog. That means you put $100 in, you get $270 out, whereas the Liberals are very much in the minuses. That means you have to put in, if you put in $100, you'll get, you have to put in a larger amount than $100 to get $100 back. Yeah. And it's been interesting to watch, but despite the fact that the Conservatives have only either been a tie or underdogs to the Liberals, 70% of the bettors in Ontario are putting the money on the Conservative. 28% are putting on the Liberal, and here's what's interesting, 2% have voted in the other category. The other category could be the Bloc, could be the Greens, could be the NDP, where the odds are somewhere around, I think, plus 7,500. If that hits...
Yeah, that's a sign you have too much money.
Pay your mortgage. No, you're paying your mortgage with that one, right? Yeah. But ultimately, the money is going to the is going on the Conservatives. And obviously, when you're talking about FanDuel and applications like this, you're betting on them winning. It's not like I can bet on them losing. No. Yeah. And then another data point that I think is really interesting is that what FanDuel tells us is of the 70% of the bets on the Conservatives for this election, 80% of them came after the election was called. So already at that point, there wasn't it wasn't a long shot bet at the time. They were pretty even, and the odds have only progressively gotten less likely for the Conservatives to win, and yet people are like, take my money, take my money.
I'm very curious who these bets are, because if you ever bet on football, you always know the public money is a little dumber than the smart money. And if you get someone voting on the Dallas Cowboys, there might be a lot of public money on there, and it might just be dumb money. I don't know if that's what this Conservative money is, but the problem is we don't quite know who's betting on politics. What manner of degenerate gambler is betting on politics? It could be actually smart people who know something.
That's true.
But I will say, these odds, which have moved longer for the Conservatives, gotten worse for the Conservatives, track the mood of Conservative strategists and partisans, the people we talk to who are behind the scenes. They increasingly feel like this is slipping away from them. And actually, Polymarket, the betting market, it has a market on who's the next prime minister after the election. Carney's now at 83%. Pierre Poilievre is only at 17%. That has followed a similar trajectory. It's gotten less and less likely for Poilievre. So if you're one of those people who still thinks Pierre Poilievre has a chance, you could make some money right now, FanDuel or Polymarket or whatever. But I think what we use this for is just a sense of what's looking more likely right now. Right now, it's looking like Carney's going to win.
And there was something else in the stats that was interesting. There's this kind of known kind of political ethos that it's hard to count the Liberals as out in a race because they're, over the decades, have proved to be a rather ruthlessly effective electoral machine. Right? They're just very efficient. They know how to get their vote out. Even if they're losing an election, they're very good at hyper-targeting ridings and making sure. I remember our former colleague of ours had written a piece after the 2021 election showing that in every riding where the vote was won by 5% or less, they all went to the Liberals because the Liberals were able to pinpoint. And I get the sense that a lot of Ontario bettors on FanDuel know that, because another piece of data that was provided to us says nearly half of the bets placed on the Liberal Party of Canada were placed before they became favorites. What that tells me is that there is a significant tranche of, at the very least, degenerate bettor politicos who looked at the odds probably when they were actually very, very long shots for the Liberals, maybe up to plus 1,700, and said, mathematically, Trudeau hadn't maybe left at this point, Carney hadn't come in, Trump hadn't started happening as a president, and they said, there's a chance at plus 1,700 where I can make a lot of money because this machine never quite breaks. Or it's hard to break at the very least, and through money. And so I think what we're seeing is actually a very interesting reflection of how Ontarians think about it, betting Ontarians. And you've seen it yourself. It seems like on Polymarket, there's more money on Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, like here. But it doesn't mean that they think he's going to win, right?
Yeah, exactly. They could be saying no. Great. Thanks, Chris. And thank you so much for watching. I'm sure we'll see you next time after the election.